So, thanks for being here. Um, Kind of the big question I had to get started with is why are you spending so much of your fortune to try to win such a thankless job? It's probably the most difficult job in the state. So, what's motivating you to make this drive for governor?
I think I give us the best chance to make a difference. And 64 years old, it's not a stepping stone or anything else. Probably it's a 4-year gig. You do the right thing, you make the tough choices, and you hand over a state that's in much better shape going forward. And I met Annie here. I raised my family here, started my business here. Connecticut's been pretty good to me, and a lot of my buddies down there in Fairfield County are saying, I'm out of here, I'm moving to Delray, this place can't get out of its own way, and that's not the way I look at it.
Looking over your policy issues, a lot of things, a lot of ideas, certainly, a lot of them that line up with us editorially. Probably the primary criticism we had is you seem to be kind of dancing around that $4 billion gorilla there, the deficit that you'll confront. A lot of the ideas proposed, all things being equal, a governor could pursue, right off the bat, but the next governor, whoever he is, immediately goes in and has to fill that gap. So if you could provide some reassurances or what your views are and how the state goes about that and still fulfills many of these goals you've set.
Yeah, well, let me give me a few minutes. Can I give you a real answer?
Yeah, this is a long form.
Okay.
Meeting,
Well, first off is do no harm. So I think the idea of a false promise that I'm going to eliminate, $10, $11 billion over 8 years runs counter to the Fiscal Commission, which resonated with me. The Fiscal Commission was the Commission on Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth. And they knew that you're never going to have real economic growth unless we can get fiscal stability, get our economic house in order. So it's a fake promise to say that we're going to take $2 billion a year out of the income tax and corporate income tax and estate tax. That would just put us through fiscal hell every 2 years. I think it's the wrong way to go. And my friend Oz Grable takes it from the other side, which is not only do no harm, but almost do nothing. And to me, the idea that we would just borrow, take money out of the rainy day fund. This is no rainy day. The sun is shining. This is a time when, we ought to be fixing this and not wasting an opportunity to turn things around, and/or shortchanging the pension fund. Those are the two main ideas I've heard from Oz. At least they're real. At least the numbers add up, or you can figure out what he's thinking about. But that's what Jody did, that's what John did, Roland, and that's what got us into this mess. So that's a backhanded way of getting into, what I would do. I think, Paul, it's, this is the time to make the changes we need to get this structural deficit behind us. And I can't solve it all in a year, but at least I can give you a glide path. How we get to fiscal stability. I have been pretty specific, I think, in terms of where I'd focus on spending cuts, and I would focus like a laser beam first and foremost on the spending side, because the taxpayers don't have confidence their money's being well spent. I hear that wherever I go. And there's no line item in there for waste, fraud, and abuse, which others may imply, but there is a lot of room for savings. So I've said, number one, go where the money is, and that's in healthcare. That's 25% of the budget. A lot of that is related to the state employee healthcare plan, and we've got to be a lot more aggressive there in terms of jamming down the price of pharma, the price of drugs, using our purchasing power, just like they did in New Jersey when they went out to bid with the PBMs. They got pretty good analytics behind how state employees are using their drugs in a way, and they were able to save hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Parentheses, when I said this, when I was out seeing your friends in Pfizer, they said, by the way, when you talk about the price of pharma, remember, it's not just Pfizer, it's also it's the PBMs and the hospitals and a lot of other ways those prices get inflated. Also, I've got to sit down with labor and say we've got to change the way we pay for health care, moving much more towards bundled payments, much more towards value-based, as opposed to, and Kevin Lembo's made some progress on this, truth be told, but we got a long way to go in terms of finding out. I want the health insurers to be aligned with our state employees and to do everything they can to keep them healthy, to keep them out of the emergency room, to keep them out of the specialty clinics. And the third thing is I look at the fact that we have healthcare systems, and some systems cost twice as much as other systems in the state of Connecticut. So there ought to be some ways that I can sit down and negotiate with the state employees. So we'll pay up to the average, but I can't pay up to the most expensive brand name available for each and every hip operation or whatever it might be. So there's some specific ideas that represent hundreds of millions of dollars, which I can only do if I sit down with labor, because we've extended that contract out for 10 years. And I think I give us the best chance to sit collaboratively with labor and say, look, these are not big give-backs. I'm trying to make some significant reforms that save the taxpayer real money in the near term, and I think do not do harm to your state employees. Number two on health care is Medicaid. A couple of things there. One, we got to continue our efforts to keep people out of the nursing homes and institutionalization. It costs 4 or 5 times more there than allowing people to stay at home. Medicaid has a reimbursement for home nurses and the such that we ought to continue to emphasize. That's why, for me, the property tax is such an important tax to do my best to hold the line or even reduce to allow our seniors a better opportunity to stay at home. As an aside, on the exchanges and Obamacare, there's a reinsurance plan that we haven't taken advantage of. So the folks with pre-existing conditions, which is for me an important line in the sand, I am going to make sure the folks with pre-existing conditions continue to have that protection in Connecticut, come what may in Washington, D.C. But the reinsurance plan offered by the feds is held down the cost on the exchanges by 10, 15%. You look at Maryland and a couple other places that have just taken advantage of that waiver. Second bucket when it comes to how you hold the line on spending is obviously in the pensions. And, there it's tough. It's tougher than what the Republicans would have you believe. I mean, the Republicans would tell you, look, why do we pay these state employees so much more than we pay in the private sector, especially when you include benefits? Let's roll it back. Let's give them a 401k the same way we do in the private sector, and over time, we'll solve this problem. And Dan has already done a lot of that. It's called Tier 4s. I know Paul knows. What I've got to do is negotiate in good faith to bring down the rate of increase on the pension liability side, and as a show of good faith, show state employees and teachers that we're going to do a better job on the asset side as well. Because, and as an aside, I don't like people blaming the state employees and teachers for this mess that we're in. I mean, that 70-year-old teacher who worked her heart out for the state for 30, 35 years under a contract, now she's 70, and the only thing she has to live on is that pension. Doesn't even have Social Security. All she has is that pension. So, that's who we're negotiating with. And so for the teachers, I would say a couple things. I would say, look, on the asset side, we think about putting the state lottery in there. Idea I just stole shamelessly from the Fiscal Commission. But it's a show of good faith. It was supposed to go for education. We've been looting that for other things for years. It's $350 million. It's got a asset value you could guesstimate $6-8 billion, and it's a way to say, hey, look, I'm going to do my part to start shoring up the pension, in this case for the teachers, so that the next generation of teachers know that we have a pension for you, not just the others. And obviously, some of these teachers are going to want to move to a 401k. They're going to want something more portable. They may not think of this as a lifetime job. But and on the other side of the equation, we're going to have to find a way to, stretch out the payments on the teacher's side. With that bond covenant we got on there, this could really hammer the state in the next 5-7 years, right? And $1.5 billion could go to 5 or 6, depending on the rate of return assumptions and the such. So I think if I show the good faith, we get the funding ratio up closer to 70 or 75%. I have better opportunity to work collaboratively with the bondholders, renegotiate that, stretch out those payments, at least stabilize the payments we got to put into that teacher's pension fund over a period of time. But I'll be blunt. I mean, as I've said on the state employee side, I've got to get you to the table. We've got to negotiate this in good faith. I can't tear up the contract, take me to court when Kavanaugh's in the Supreme Court. We'll be able to do whatever. That would just be 8 years of hell for the state. But I do think that double dipping and $200,000 pensions, for the legislatures, God bless you guys. What are you doing putting your mileage in there? So I'm going to be constructive, collaborative, but tough-minded. And I think I give us the best chance to get that done for the very reason, you may be suspicious of me, that Ned's got the support of labor. He's not going to be able to get anything done. I think I'm the only person who will be able to sit down and, in good faith, say, we're going to make our payments over an extended period of time. I'm not going to eliminate the income tax and say I can't afford to do our share. I mean, what type of a good faith effort is that? I'm going to do my piece on the asset side, like I said, but I've got to reduce the rate of increase on those liabilities. Otherwise, it's a fiscal train wreck. And if I can do that, that gives me, reduces the pension contribution I'd have to make, in the near term, extends it out for the longer term. You're right about that. I can keep going. Obviously, on shared services, that's not a near-term savings, but I love our feisty 169 towns, but that doesn't mean we need 169 tax collectors and 150 superintendents and deputy superintendents and fire chiefs. And I've got to give folks incentives to do a better job of collaborating. And we have so many smaller school districts, New London not being one of them, I mean more in our smaller towns, that we're one of the few states in the country that has more administrators outside the classroom than teachers in the classroom. And I cannot, and the taxpayers of Connecticut cannot afford to subsidize inefficiency any longer. That's going to take a while, and I don't do it with a stick. I do it with some incentives. We'll fund your high school at 70% if it's a school that has at least 1,000 students. Maybe you work with some of your neighboring towns. But I can't afford to fund it if it's still going to be a school that's small enough, high school, that it's just no longer efficient. And finally, and you've written about this, Paul, I think over time, and it could accelerate in 2022, you may see a fair number of our state employees take early retirement, which is not great for the pension fund. That's a different story. But the pension calculations change in a few years. And that may be a time that I look hard at the not-for-profit community when it comes to delivery of our social services. And
you mean you would go to them for more services to be delivered?
I'd like to take a look at that, absolutely. And anyway, those are some broad ways that I would look at the spending side of the equation hard. And I can't get it all done in a year. I appreciate that, but at least you know the way I'm thinking about it.
The pushback we've gotten from labor leadership, we've raised this issue of, as they say, well, we've given concessions time and again. We've been back to the table. Raise the tax on the rich people and then get back to us. So what is your kind of answer to them? I know you were saying that, unlike your opponent, your party of good faith is you're not going to give tax breaks to the wealthy and then ask the
eliminate the income tax
and then ask the unions to sacrifice. But in our conversations, they would like to see higher taxes on the well-to-do here in Connecticut. They don't, they don't see it as overly burdensome if they're going to be asked to make more concessions. So, what's the dialogue you might have on that issue, and why that might
Look,
be
you're right. I mean, labor has given up a fair amount over the last 5 years, and I wish we had done it 20 years ago. If Tier 4 was 20 years ago, we wouldn't nearly be in this pickle today. So I'm not going to turn the clock back and blame a lot of former governors, but it would have been a dramatic difference compared to where we are today. And as I said, we're going to do our share in terms of making the regular payments, not shortscape it like other governors have done and maybe current candidates are talking about. I have said we're going to do our side on the assets to give a good faith effort. And I think the alternative to me, if your labor is, I don't know what's going to happen. So we got to sit down. I'm not breaking anybody's arms. I'm not tearing up contracts. I'm not reopening. I'm just saying right now we have a health care as well as pension thing that is not supportable. And I'm going to make a good faith effort working with you to make this supportable in the long term.
But it sounds like your description is your approach. You're not going to lead with tax increases. That's been the warning that the Republicans are giving, like another Democrat, more of the same. We're going to see more tax increases. Sounds like you feel before that is even on the table, you have to demonstrate to the people in Connecticut that you've wrung out all the savings you can wring out. You've implemented some of these ideas you just went over.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think that is true. I've been quite specific in terms of what I would think about on the revenue side. One thing, I'm the only candidate in the history of politics who's crazy enough to do a TV ad about it. And I said, look, I think I look at the sales tax. I see that it applies to Main Street merchants, and they have to collect the sales tax. And I see it doesn't ask the big out-of-state internet retailers to do that as well. I think it's fundamentally unfair. I think Amazon and eBay and their brethren, it's an unfair playing field, and it costs the state a lot of money. And I want to do everything I can to protect our Main Street business. So that's one revenue idea that I would have on the table. We've talked a little bit about sports betting and some other things. If you call, putting up, regulating that and taxing that, that's something that I would also put on the table. I've talked very specifically about what I would do on the car tax. And it's not a new revenue thing. What I would do, though, is it just seems to me outrageous that a 2015 Buick in Greenwich costs 1/4 as much to insure as a 2015 Buick in New London or Bridgeport. So that's one way that I think.
So how would you approach that to explain?
I'd do that on a statewide basis, equalize mill rate. I'd disperse the same amount of money back where it came from. But there's a lot of misinformation out there in the TV land on that, and that's not a new revenue idea, but that's a way that I can continue to cut the property tax, in this case on cars for 80% of people.
So the state would equalize a mill rate, so wherever that Buick is, you're paying the same tax on it.
Yeah, let's say Madison, Connecticut, or Greenwich has a mill rate that's 1/4 what it is in New London.
But the state doesn't grab that revenue at that point, and the towns have to figure it out. It goes back to the towns.
No, it goes back to the towns. I'm going to hold everybody harmless on that front, but it's a way that some folks are going to pay a little more, and 80% of the people will get a cut. And then finally, we can talk about transportation and e-tolling on the tractor-trailer trucks if you want, but I've got some ideas.
While we're talking on the revenue side, because correct me if I'm wrong, I thought originally you were open to tolls generally. Rhode Island went with the trucks, and you seem to you amended and said let's do trucks. Are trucks going to be sufficient really, given the money we're going to need to?
Yeah, I narrowed it to trucks. For a couple of reasons. One, they couldn't even get it to a vote. in the legislature. I mean, the idea, you're going to have a toll booth in everybody's driveway, and okay, this is doesn't poll very well. I got it. And then secondly, I did look across the river to Rhode Island, and I saw what they had done on tractor-trailer trucks. It's been challenged by the truckers. I appreciate that, but we're going to know within a few months whether that is something we can do or not. It's probably $250 million to the state, Paul. You're not going to be able to fix the roads and bridges and keep Shoreline East going on a regular basis by relying on the gas tax. That's already very high, and it's a disappearing source of revenue, for reasons you understand, fuel efficient, Tesla, whatever. And I got to find a way to honestly pay for what we got to do. Down in my part of the state, it takes 10 minutes longer to get from, say, Stamford to Grand Central than it did just a decade ago, because you got to slow up over some of those bridges for safety reasons. So I'm sorry, guys. I know we hate paying for things, but if you're going to be serious about fixing our roads and bridges, have more frequent rail service, which I think is key to economic growth and opportunity in this state, I'm going to pay for it, and I told you how I'm going to do it.
Can I jump in for a minute?
Yeah.
I think a lot of what you're suggesting, particularly because we've been talking more about the revenue and the spending cuts particularly, is going to take some huge consensus, some real inspirational leadership. Do you think that you can get people who are as divided as people are right now, and who are getting in the habit of being divided? Can you get them to see this as the kind of sacrifice that the Fiscal Commission was talking about? We live through 2 to 4 really bad years, and then it starts to get better. Can you see that really happening? Because it almost seems like that's the only way out of this.
I think it's the only way out, and I think I give us the best chance to do that. I think, look, I respect labor. I stop blaming labor. I have some confidence there, and they have some confidence that I'm going to try and do the right thing on a fair-minded basis. I come out of the business world, first guy to start a business as governor in a long, long time. I think I can work well with business. I need them at that table too, by the way. I need their help on job training. I need their help at a curriculum in community colleges. I was at the Workforce Development Board right here the other day. I mean, we need them rolling up their sleeves.
You need them to contribute financially?
I do.
Yeah.
Not necessarily by corporate income tax, but by maybe Electric Boat helps us with the community college costs, and they pick up the tab for that laser welder, just like Pratt & Whitney does a good one right now, by the way. They're desperate for these folks. Bring down the cost of community college, make it more accessible to people, give us the incentives we need to train the people for the jobs that are out there. Jeffrey Geiger, I talked to him the other day. What's he talking about, 13,000, 14,000 people over the next decade?
They're at 16.5 right now.
16.5 they would need.
No, 16.5 they're at right now.
They're at right now.
18,000, which is going to be about 10,000 more.
Yeah,
15,000 more people.
Exactly. And, Gina's right across the way, right? She's got her community college. It's focused on the type of skills you need to build submarines. So, nobody's left out of this equation, and I need business there as well. Republicans and Democrats, it's pretty tribal up there in Hartford, but I don't come from Hartford. I come from a very different background. And
At this point, nobody comes from
nobody will admit it anyway. But I've talked to the Republicans as well as the Democrats. I mean, if you're a state legislator and you're earning whatever it is, $25,000 a year, you didn't do it to get rich. You did it because you wanted to make a difference. And the idea that you're going to go through fiscal hell every 2 years is not why they want to be there either. So, and the Republicans know that elimination of over 50-60% of our state revenues is la-la land, silliness, hogwash. They know what we got to do. So can I get it done? That's a different question. Do I give us the best chance to get it done? I think I do.
The Q poll that just came out saw a huge gender gap, and You're a supporter of something called the Paradigm for Parity Pledge, the Paradigm for Parity Pledge. I found on your website. Could you talk a
Yeah.
little about that and your philosophy in trying to provide greater equality in business and in pay for women?
It's how will I put it? I can tell you as a small business guy, each and every person in your workforce, in this case women, you do everything you can to make sure they can continue working. So if it's a pregnancy or a sickness, you've got to make accommodations. For me to lose my controller for a reason like that. So that's why I'm pretty passionate on paid family and medical leave, for example. I think it's not just the right thing to do for that child or the right thing to do for that worker. And it's pointed out to me in a lot of our cities right now in particular, half the workers are single parents. And I think if you want to, you have to have a workplace that accommodates the 21st century. And Paul, I know it's a burden on small business and it drives away. No, at a point when you've got a 3.5% unemployment, you're desperate to keep your folks working, desperate to attract new people to your work. That's what I hear wherever I go. This is the time for us to do that. And in terms of pay equity, let me tell you the other thing in small business. Everybody knows what people earn. They all talk. And it's just so demoralizing that people find out that it's an unfair, payment process, salary process you've got. So I think it's important to give women and young women, confidence on that I'm going to have a workplace that better accommodates 21st century, and that often means women and often means single moms. So I'm going to make that happen.
How do you fund paid family leave? Where's the money come from, to pay that worker when they're out because there's a medical crisis or some other situation at home and they have to miss a few weeks? Bigger corporations would seem better able to handle it. You talked about a small business. They're probably...
Yeah, I'm not sure that's all on the employer or on the small business. I think maybe the employee contributes as well. We set aside something for a fund. I look at some of the ideas coming out of Washington, D.C., Marco Rubio, Ivanka Trump's. There's a lot of interesting ways that we can make this happen, which don't necessarily fall totally on the shoulders of small business because, I'm one of them, so I know what that would mean. I'm not locked in on what that would be. I'm locked in on getting it done.
And kind of a topic that's often lumped with that is that increasing the minimum wage. Could you talk about why you're in support of that and what you think the dynamics are?
Yeah, I'm in support of raising the minimum wage. So was the Fiscal Commission. You do it over a period of time. You get it to $15. You keep up with the rate of inflation. I'll tell you one reason. Because I was a small business, and I paid my folks a good wage, and they had decent benefits and good health care, and I didn't like competing against fly-by-night operations that didn't do that. And I don't really love the idea that these guys that don't pay a decent wage get subsidized by the state, earned income tax credit and things. Why is that our job? Why is that the taxpayer's job? And I'll tell you something else. I just think it's the right thing to do at a time when you've got, again, 3.5% unemployment. I may not have thought it was a great idea 8 years ago when we were, the unemployment lines were stretching down the block. But this is the time for us to start doing this. Our neighbors have done it, Massachusetts, New York. A lot of these are folks in the service industry. These are not jobs we're losing to South Carolina or China. And I think you pay people for the work they do, and we do it in a very methodical way so people can plan for it.
And it sounds like you would support some kind of inflationary link, so we're not having this fight every few years over what it should be?
Well, getting up to 15 will take us for, what did the Fiscal Commission say, 4 or 5 years? So
yeah, okay.
So let's start with that.
Okay.
But yeah, it hasn't kept pace for decades now.
And inflation's gonna go up. Looks like...
Very possibly, yeah. We've been predicting that for about the last 8 years, but
I'm monopolizing. Anybody got something? I've got I got plenty, but I don't want to.
On the revenue side, there's been the idea tossed around about legalizing marijuana. I believe your opponent has said that he thinks that should be studied more. So where do you land on that?
I think I would legalize it. Look, you're right across the border, Massachusetts. You'll be able to drive over from there within, what is it, a month or two? New York, New Jersey. I think that train has left the station. I think we regulate it. We can do that in a way, at least the bad guys aren't lacing it. I think we're very careful about how we sell it. And maybe we can use some revenues there to deal with the opioid epidemic or put that money to good use. And I'll also tell you, I just don't like the marijuana laws. I do think they're discriminatory in some ways, and kids of color are much more likely to go to jail, and it can destroy lives. And we've made some progress on that. I don't want to overstate it what decriminalization means, but for those kids in a city who maybe are doing something within 2,000 feet of a school or whatever it is, they are still paying an incredible price. And so there are a lot of reasons why I think now is the time for us to do that in Connecticut.
One sort of counter to that is that places like EB are having a lot of trouble finding people for these jobs. A lot of reasons because they don't qualify for these jobs, and some people have argued that legalizing marijuana, then you're just going to have more people that aren't qualified to be in the workforce. I mean, what would be your response to that argument? Right, drug testing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Well, the federal law will sometime match state law. I can't remember how many states have legalized marijuana now, from California, and obviously Colorado is the longest. I think that's 4 or 5 years. Well, right now, if EB says if there are any traces of marijuana, you can't get a job, that's their decision. And maybe that's following some federal law, by the way. You would know better than I would on that. And that law, if you want to work at EB, that's the deal.
Is it also a safety thing? I mean, you're doing.
Yeah, well, there's the drug-free workplace act, but it boils down to safety. You don't want a welder high on the job.
Right. I mean, you may have jobs.
Well, that's alcohol too. I mean, that doesn't happen. That's a different situation.
Yeah, it's the testing issue.
It's the testing issue.
Because you can't tell whether it was
a
week ago or lunch break.
Talk about how they are looking for skilled workers at EB. After our debate at UConn the other day, I was just walking around the next day, and all of a sudden I see 3 Black Hawk helicopters flying into UConn. So I was like a kid again. I'm running after to see what's going on. I go to the School of Engineering, and there's the provost and the dean, and it's a Sikorsky recruiting drive. And they got all the students, School of Engineering, and I think they're going to hire 80 or 90 of them, and they were giving folks a flight. I mean, I don't know about when you graduated from college, but nobody was flying me around in a Black Hawk. So this is to me, I mean, get back to growth and jobs. I mean, this is a time where I want to make sure we train Connecticut people for these jobs. We got tens of thousands of jobs we can fill, and I want to make sure they're for Connecticut families.
Last week, I think it was now, there was a interesting forum held here by the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut. And
I was here, yeah. Keith Fanoff came, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And the audience was largely people who manage nonprofit agencies of any kind of social service you can think of. And their topic was basically what's going to happen to what we provide when this next crunch budget comes. A lot of them pointed out things they can try to do, like avoiding duplication of services, for instance, that kind of thing. But it became really starkly clear how many of them are essentially state contractors, and that what they're doing is making up for the closing of the mental health hospitals and, Seaside and the other places for the developmentally disabled. In other words, services we can't really spare. What is the plan? What is the hope for what you can do? I mean, they've been taking cuts for a long time. And are you convinced that they are being justly reimbursed, or does that need to be looked at?
Oh, I think it's got to be looked at.
Yeah.
You talk to Keith Fanoff, and everything is a fixed cost except for the not-for-profits. All eyes seem to be on these folks who deliver a very high quality service with a lot of heart at a pretty efficient way. And some of that is the folks haven't gotten a raise in years, and that's part of. I got to tell you, honestly, the $15 minimum wage will. I'm going to have to accommodate that for some of the not-for-profits whose folks have, way below that $15 number and over a period of time. But like I said before, I think when you see some of the early retirements, I think you'll see the not-for-profits step up, and I got to find a way collaboratively to do that in a way that makes sense for them as well. They're barely getting by. But it's not just the taxpayers do this. I mean, I could use, good-hearted citizens in the business community to also help the not-for-profits going forward. And I'll tell you something else with the Trump tax bill, which cost the state of Connecticut about $1 billion. I mean, you can mention that to my Republican friends. The Democrats are always raising taxes. Well, that's the biggest one we've had in a long time, the non-deductibility of state and local taxes. That may drive the payment mechanism to the not-for-profits as well, because my contribution to that not-for-profit is deductible. My, quote, contribution to the state of Connecticut is not deductible.
Can I ask you another contribution kind of question? Because you seem to be open to that as a way to fund things. The subject comes up often that's all right, of taxing the wealthy. What about asking for the creation of some kind of foundation in which people could give charitably to benefit the state, either in certain specified areas or more generally? I'm not an expert on what New Jersey and New York are trying to do, but they are using charitable contribution as a way to sort of fight back with the Trump tax bill. Have you given any thought to voluntary payment of some kind?
Absolutely. I mean, the New York idea, I think the IRS said this is a end around our SALT deductibility thing, so it's being challenged. Okay, every good idea gets challenged. That's life. If I can, people make that contribution, maybe they can deduct that. I can give some sort of a credit on their income tax, ways to give them an incentive to keep our not-for-profits growing and prospering and be able to take care of more and more things. So I've talked to Phil Murphy in New Jersey a little bit. Obviously, I'd love to talk to Charlie Baker and Gina. Nobody knows Andrew Cuomo, so I don't know what New York's doing, I'm afraid. But I think it's the type of thing we think about collaboratively. And then you got to figure out, they're trying to make the Trump tax bill, the non-deductibility of SALT, permanent, right? That's going to come up in the next Congress. It almost came up in this Congress. So think about that when you vote for Congress, because that is incredibly expensive to states like Connecticut, who are already big donor states, right?
Thank you.
On taxes, you've made property tax relief one of the core platforms of your campaign. Could you talk about why and what that would look like?
It's the biggest tax paid by the middle class. It's the biggest tax paid by small business. We want to do everything we can to allow seniors to stay in their homes and not feel like they got to go to Del Rey or they got to go to a nursing home. So I think it's a good faith effort to tell people I get it. I know about the high cost of Connecticut, which is a lot more than taxes. It's tuition, electricity, and things, healthcare. But I do take a little exception when people say, Stefanowski wants to eliminate the income tax, Lamont wants to do property tax. Well, remember, his is $11 billion. Mine is $140 million. So it's something that I think I know we can pay for, I know we can do in that first budget cycle. It's moderate, I appreciate that, but it's doable, and it's real, and it's honest. And it's a good faith effort to people that I know what they're going through. Look, you're not going to, New London, if your property taxes go up more, people are just going to keep pouring out to lower cost suburbs, Paul, and that's the end for New London. I can't let that happen.
I'm not a New London resident, but Lisa is, and she can vouch for that.
All right.
Sure
You're still hanging tough, Lisa.
She's seen a few neighbors leave. So how would it work? How would you structure your property tax relief?
I would do it as a property tax credit on your state income tax. So just to make sure that it doesn't go to some other mischief at the local level, so it's a real tax cut that you enjoy.
And it's going to be a priority in the legislature. You're going to drive them, working with you to find the offsetting savings that are going to be necessary to make it. It sounds like it's going to be a real priority. I mean, given how much you've.
Yeah, I said I'm going to do it, so it's a priority. Right?
And why? You've mentioned the relief. Do you think it has economic benefits, or you mentioned just people know you get it, that's one of the onerous things they confront, especially the urban centers. Does it have other desirable effects once you start?
Yeah, I want to be a champion for our cities. And right now, property tax is driving people like you out of New London or our cities. And I think that's the exact wrong way to go for our state. I think you want to make cities affordable. I think you want to have cities with as transportation hubs. You want cities with great K through 12 education. You want cities with some affordable housing in and around those transit hubs. And I want to see more jobs going there and not being built, on a cornfield in Coventry. I just think that is the future of the state. And so I got to admit, $300 in the first budget and $1,200 property tax, added on in the second budget is a start. And it's a way to make it more affordable. That's why reason number 18, I think eliminating the income tax, that cost just gets shoved right down to our cities and jacks up property tax and has the exact wrong direction in terms of what it would send. And it probably wouldn't be too good for our schools either.
Just while you're on cities, as much as you prioritize cities, it sounds like you wouldn't have signed off on the Hartford bailout relief plan. Use your description.
Yeah. I would not. No, I thought it was rushed, and I thought it was wrong-headed the way they did it. It ended up being an enormous bailout for the bondholders who, back when Hartford was, mentioning bankruptcy as a real possibility, the price of their bonds drops down to whatever it was, 65 cents in the dollar. Then the state says, hey, we're going to guarantee all these bonds. It shoots back up to 100 cents in the dollar. And that was not a win for the kids in Hartford. That is not a win for the cops or the folks that keep the streets safe. That was a win for the bondholders. So I thought it was a dumb way for them to do it. And in the legislature, I'm shocked. I didn't know what I was voting on. We're going to cut back on aid to Hartford going forward. Seriously? You had no idea that this was a 40-year bond that you were guaranteeing, through the middle part of this century? I mean, that was a little embarrassing, I thought. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is, I think what's done is done. I mean, it's not like, sorry, I want to time out and redo that. What I don't want to see the legislature do is, all right, I'm going to cut back on ECS funding for Hartford, or I'm going to cut back on pilot funding, or somehow, punish the people of Hartford because of your bond deal that didn't make any sense. So
it's not beyond the realm of possibility a future governor confronted in another urban center. So while that's done is done, it sounds like you would have different parameters as far as working with a community to try to get them.
I would. I mean, I would. First, I want a state to do what we said we were going to do, which is, full funding of ECS. You may not like the formula. I've been to 169 towns. 169 towns don't like the formula. Okay, we'll figure out a way that we direct that money to places most in need. Pilot, I understand payment in lieu of taxes. I'm not as expert on New London, but I do know what it means in New Haven. I do know what it means in Hartford. I do know how much it costs them. And I'd go even further than that. I mean, I would also say, Hartford, what are you doing buying 2 office buildings that were on the private tax roll and making them into government buildings and taking them off the grand list at the same time, we're struggling to make our payments? I mean, I would go the other direction. I would see the state of Connecticut shedding some of those real estate assets, sale leasebacks, put them back on the tax roll. It's another way that I can help out the cities, especially if we can't fully fund pilot. One idea that we bandied about is let's say we got 3,500 buildings here in the state, give or take. Nobody seems to know. They don't know what the occupancy is. They just don't seem to know. And I put them under some sort of a REIT, private management, maybe allocate that to the state pension fund, and then we sell that off in a strategic way. And those monies go to the state pension fund. It's just one more way I can show state employees we're making a good faith effort. It won't solve the problem, Paul, but it's a good faith effort to show we're making an effort.
Can you back up to pilot again? What would you be trying to do? Would you be trying to fund it at the levels that it was originally intended to be?
I can't do that in year one. I can guarantee you that. I mean, there's too much to do there.
But it's your goal to do something with it.
Look, I think payment in lieu of taxes makes an awful lot of sense.
Right.
Maybe the taxpayers do some of that through pilot. Maybe, what do they call it, silo or something? Services in lieu of taxes. Maybe some of these not-for-profits can contribute a little bit more as well because, we're providing police and fire and we're providing an awful lot of services there. And I think that is something that we should consider as well, all of which serves to bring down the tax rate in our cities, which I think is so important.
Would you be open to also reevaluating who qualifies as a nonprofit? I think there's sometimes an argument that certain people who now are a nonprofit, are not maybe operating the same way they were when they applied for nonprofit status.
Yeah, I mean, a church is a nonprofit. A building that Yale buys that has some academic purposes and also commercial purposes, let's take a look at that.
We considered Access Health Connecticut one of the more successful state programs to implement ACA and build on it. As we know, in Washington, this administration's been antagonistic towards ACA. They tried to repeal it unsuccessfully, but they've done a lot to try to undermine it since. What would you see if your governor, working with the legislature, is kind of Connecticut's role to try to prop up and provide the health care protection that the ACA was intended to provide?
Yeah, I think they asked us this question at the last debate. I stood out by saying I think the ACA has been an enormous benefit, not just for the country, but for Connecticut. It reduced the number of uninsured in our state by half. It brought down the number of bankruptcies related to healthcare emergencies dramatically. It gives great security to folks with pre-existing conditions. I probably get that question, Paul, on the campaign trail more than anything else. My daughter with autism, my husband with diabetes, are they going to be covered? And a governor working with the legislature can make a difference there. I'm the one guy who said I would be a firewall there. I would fight to make sure that these benefits continue to be included in our exchange plan. And that also includes contraception and maternity care and some of the other things that are part of the ACA benefit package. I don't like the skinny package. All that means is the healthiest people leave the pool and leaving the sickest people back on the exchange. And that doesn't help the state of Connecticut or the people most in need.
The Malloy administration started with a huge effort, first five, to bring in a lot of business to the state. And I guess it had some successes and it definitely had some that didn't pan out. What's your thought about trying to recruit new business to the state? And would it be specific industries? I mean, is there something Connecticut ought to be specializing in?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I wasn't a big fan of the first five. I wasn't a big fan of a bunch of politicians picking and choosing winners and, hey, you'll get something, you get something. I wasn't a big fan of us using incentives as the main way to attract businesses here. Mm-hmm. Sidebar before I get back to your question, when we were working on the Infosys deal, the IT company we got to come to Hartford, I was sort of struck by what we were competing with Gina Raimondo across the way, and she famously said, to Ravi Kumar, the president of Infosys. I'll match any incentive that Connecticut's offering you. Now let me tell you why you ought to be in Rhode Island. And that resonated with me. You know, we're leading with incentives. What should we be doing? I mean, I think we should be doing what government does best, get our fiscal house in order, fix our transportation system, and train folks so that those 15,000 jobs are Connecticut jobs. Where do I think but your question is great, because let's go where we have the wind to our back a little bit. I mean, I brought the number 3 person from Google here the other day, here at me in New Haven, actually. And, you know, everybody's talking about how can we have a Silicon Valley here in Connecticut, and woe is me, and we don't have a great school of, you know, computer science and things like that. And then we just said, well, we are the Silicon Valley of manufacturing. We have some of the best talent and best advanced manufacturing in the world. That's always been Connecticut's calling card. So you say, where would you focus? Maybe focus where our strengths are. And certainly around here, it's advanced manufacturing. And continue to grow off of that. And those are the type of companies that have a real reason to be in Connecticut, not just an incentive. New Haven was probably a little more focused on healthcare and life sciences, given Yale, New Haven, and the lab space there at Bear, and what's left of Alexion and Achillean. You know, they've got the beginning of an ecosystem there. I probably would have tried Jackson Labs, no offense, Farmington, but in New Haven, because that's what that part of the state is really going to be able to be a leader in if we double down there.
But we're so small. I mean, we forget how small we are. It shouldn't take that long to get from Farmington to Quinnipiac.
Well, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
That's a really fair point. I mean,
We
they are part of the same ecosystem.
But, so you're thinking advanced manufacturing with Eastern Connecticut, maybe one of the stars in that constellation?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know more about that than I do, Julia.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of submarine parts people.
Right. Right. All those yeah.
Yeah.
Extremely special.
Insurance,
Yeah.
I mean, Hartford's got it's a wind on the water, let's put it that way. It's not a wind to our back, but, you know, the Infosys deal, the 7 Clouds, which is, you know, the AI work that's being done on the old UConn campus in West Hartford, and what that can mean in terms of cryptocurrencies, and what you see in terms of InsurTech, and the fact that Aetna, you know, now they got the trained personnel coming out of Infosys, one of, you know, 20 reasons I decided to stay, but they've turned around the moving vans. So you can see where Hartford has a reason for being. You know, maybe it was a little tougher a while ago. You know, down in my neck of the woods, it's Stanford is probably still going to be finance, fintech, digital media. You know, we got NBC and a few others there. So you can see where we have pockets of advantage.
So what's the first 100 days of a Lamont administration look like? What do you roll your sleeves up of and says this is what we really immediately have to get down to? We want to see the ball move forward fairly quickly on X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I think. Hey Len, hey Themis, hey Marty, hey Bob Duff. Get over here. Maybe come over to the governor's mansion. Maybe I'll have a couple of drinks. We got to do this. And you know, by the way, you know, labor. You know, I need you to be here at this table as well. And I know people are, you know, Lamont and his mythical table and all that, but you got to start somewhere. And so that is the first thing, you know, I would do. But I do something at the same time, and I'm gonna go to our state employees and teachers and thank them for what they're doing. They haven't heard that in a long time. People are demoralized. Everybody is blaming state employees and teachers and municipal guys, and you just need you know, I never would have been able to run a business. I never would have been able to build a telecommunications system on time if everybody was just sitting there knocking the guys who were doing the work. So I know that's a little squishier in terms of what you're looking for in the first 100 days, but it has some meaning. It really does.
Well, there's probably no one in Connecticut who's not related to a state employee or a teacher. I mean, the ripple effect
Yeah.
of people in those jobs.
Yeah, we can't. We're having a hard time recruiting teachers now, and I do some very part-time teaching up at CCSU, and they broke my heart a few years ago when they pointed out we got a teachers college there. One of the original teachers college that it was the top third of the class that wanted to go into teaching a generation or two ago, and now it's not the top third. It's the bottom third in many cases. And you believe in education. You think that's the calling card. You think that's Connecticut's best advantages are the quality of our workforce. I got to turn that around, and it starts by respect. It starts by having a pension that makes some sense, and people think it might be there when they retire. It starts by maybe changing the certifications and the training so people can graduate with a little less debt. It starts with maybe if you're a teacher and you want to go teach at Harding High School in Bridgeport, where I did some volunteer work, or some of our other toughest schools, we forgive your student debt if you're willing to go to those schools and stay there for 5 years, say. That's how it starts.